Welcome back to the channel. In this video I'll be replacing the spark plugs and spark plug wires on a 2004 Chevrolet SSR. So this would apply to the 2003 and 2004 SSR and very similar to the 2005 and 6, but the 2003 and 4 had the LM4 V8 5.3 liter and the 2005 and 6 came with the LS2 6 liter. The spark plug wires on this engine are all the same length, so there's no need in noting where they came from, and I'm also replacing them, so there's no need to match up the lengths. And the spark plug wires I ended up using were from AC Delco Professional spark plug wires, and the plugs I ended up purchasing were NGK Iridium plugs, which are similar to the original equipment plugs that were provided with the engine. And I'm going to replace them. It took about an hour each side. On the driver's side, I ended up moving out the coil packs from the valve cover to give a little bit more room. And on the passenger side, I ended up moving the coolant overflow tank that we're kind of looking over right now. And that gave me more access to that whole last part of the bank there. There's the AC Delco Professional plug wires, and then the NGK plugs. I'll have the part information down in the description section of the video, and check that out if you want to find out what I use. Now on the driver's side, there's a sensor that you need to remove the wire from, which is part of the wiring harness that's entangled around the valve cover area and then the coil packs on the top of the valve cover. So remove that. Then you can go ahead and start removing, there's a large clamp around the big wiring harness we can see there on the left, and that gets in the way of moving that out of the way. So undo that clamp around the wiring harness, and there's actually one at the very top of the intake manifold you might want to undo as well. And then there are the bolts that are retaining the coil pack that you see here. That there's 5 of them that go from the front to the back, and you want to undo all 5 of those. But there's this center wiring harness connector that is for all the coil packs. So you remove that retainer ring, and then you lift up on the clamp retainer there, and then you pull the upper portion of the wiring harness connector out. And then that removes that part of it, and then you can remove those 5 bolts and then pull the coil pack out of the way. The metal clip that holds that wire connector for the coil packs is actually a little loose on that piece of metal that holds the coil packs. That's why it was a little bit harder to remove this one. But you pull that out of the way, and then you can go ahead and remove the 5 bolts that hold on the metal bracket that all the coil packs are attached to. And then you need to move it around a little bit, but you can remove that whole set of coil packs out of the way. Gives you a little bit more access to get in there. Wiring harnesses can't really move out of the way, so this is the alternative, is to give you a little more room to move that out of the way. It's fairly easy to do overall, although in the back there was a fuel injector wire that was wrapped around a small wiring harness in the back side, so make sure you check for anything that's obstructing the removal of the coil pack. As you're seeing here, the metal bracket and the coil packs. Before you attempt to remove anything, make sure it's totally free and then pull it out. Next, you're going to remove the spark plug wires from each of the spark plugs. It depends on how stuck the spark plug wire boot is to the spark plug. You may have to use some force to remove them. And since I was replacing these spark plug wires, I wasn't too concerned about hurting anything. But if you're going to reuse them, be gentle with that and transfer over this metal cap with the spring. That whole assembly goes over the new spark plug wire and that goes over the spark plug. So repeat this until all 4 are removed on this side. I'm now going to remove the spark plugs, use that 5/8 inch spark plug socket, and in this case I ended up using a 3/8 to 1/2 inch adapter and a longer handle to give me the proper length of handle to get that out of there. Depending on the amount of space, you may need a universal joint or swivel joint for your socket extension to get in there properly. The front plug removal is a little bit more challenging, and as you remove each one, inspect it for a good indication how that cylinder is performing. And you may want to mark the spark plugs so you can remember that afterwards, but remove all 4 on this side. Do that now. And off camera, I actually used a automotive mirror and flashlight to look at each one, make sure there wasn't something hanging over the spark plug that would drop into the cylinder, just to make sure it's clean before you remove the spark plug so that nothing goes into the cylinder combustion chamber. So you want to make sure that's clean before you remove the spark plugs. I'm going to compare the 2 spark plugs, the old and the new. They are the same type, iridium tip plugs. There's no compression washer on these. These have a tapered seat that provides seal on them. So you want to make sure that the spark plug holes are clean and clear of any debris. And then initially hand insert them and thread them into the threads until they seat. And then once they're all hand threaded in. You're going to then bring in the wrench to snug them up. And the torque settings, according to the service data on this particular engine, is 11 foot-pounds. That's very, very light amount of torque. And no, there is no anti-seize or anything on that. The torque settings would change a bit if that were the case. I'm just going with them dry into the spark plug threads and tighten them up to 11 foot-pounds. I'm not going to install the spark plug wires over the spark plugs. I'm going to use the supplied lubricant with the spark plug wires and use a toothpick to insert that into the boot around the inner edge of it, not on the electrode itself. It's not meant to promote electrical connectivity. In fact, it's not electric grease, so it's not going to promote connectivity of any sort. It's only there to make sure that the boot doesn't adhere to the porcelain of the spark plug, and then that a metal cap with the spring goes over the spark plug wire, and then you insert the spark plug wire over the spark plug, and you then push it until you hear the clip for that end of the spark plug wires clip onto the top of the spark plug, and then that one's inserted, and then you repeat that process for the remaining spark plugs on that side. And then once those are done, we can go ahead and get ready to reinstall the coil packs on top of the valve cover on this side of the engine. Now we're going to start reconnecting everything to get the coil packs installed, and the electrical sensor that we disconnected in the very beginning, we're going to reconnect that 2-wire connector on the very front, right above that first plug on the driver's side here. Now we're going to get that coil pack assembly back on the valve cover, getting those 5 holes aligned, and then use the 5 studs to install that again. Now there's a nut side, make sure that's facing outward, and get those installed. Then lightly torque it so that, again, it's an aluminum valve cover, so you don't want to go too much with that. But get those in place, and then we're going to go move on to getting the wiring harness connectors that we had disconnected. Remember the one around the fuel injector in the back. Then we have the main plug for the coil packs here in the middle with the securing connector, and then the one for the alternator in the front has a little mount plastic piece. Then install the plug wires, making sure they're not touching anything on the exhaust manifold or anything, so they're positioned correctly. These were just a hair longer than the original equipment spark plug wires, so make sure that they're routed correctly in your particular vehicle. Okay, we moved over to the passenger side, and as you can see, that coolant overflow reservoir tank is a bit in the way. So I decided to take that out. There's a couple mount points for that. There's a hook on the fender side of that, just behind to the left of it, and then there's a bolt at the very bottom of the front section that you need to remove, and there's a clip that's retaining some of the hose adjacent to it, so you need to remove that as well. So remove the bolt, the clip, and then you'll be able to pull that out of the bracket on the top. I ended up actually removing that bracket a little bit later on because it got in the way as well. As you can see, my arm is always over it. So we're going to go through the same steps. We're going to remove the wiring for the spark plugs, get those out of the way, retain the plastic covers that are necessary to put on the new spark plug wires. And in a moment here, we'll just, like I said, I'll take that bracket out of the way. Gives me a little bit more access. So get the spark plug wires out of the way. And there's no need to remove the coil packs off the valve cover on this side because this access is pretty clear once you get that coolant tank out of the way. Make sure you move that coolant tank gracefully and gingerly out of the way because there are hoses attached, or you could take those hoses off and move it out of the way, but then you have to refill the cooling system. I didn't have to do that. I just moved it out of the way and secured it off to the side. Then I used the wrenches here to remove the spark plugs. Of course, I inspected each whole area around the spark plugs before removing them to make sure there was no debris that would fall into the cylinders. And we got the old spark plugs out, and they all looked fairly decent. Again, probably not a source of my problem with my vehicle, but I just wanted to make sure I did this anyway. It's been 16 years that they've been in there, and as I found, the spark plug wires were adhered to the porcelain on virtually every single cylinder, and I'm checking to make sure there's no contaminants in the holes before I insert the new spark plugs. And once we get those new spark plugs in place, we'll be able to then of course, we insert them by hand and thread them in by hand first. I use the socket, of course, to install it, and then I screw it in by hand until it bottoms out. And then I'll take the appropriate wrench items to get into there, and then I'll put the torque wrench on there to torque it to the 11 foot-pounds. Again, make sure you don't put any side pressure on the spark plugs, that will crack the porcelain, so make sure you keep it nice and straight, the wrench or socket straight on the spark plug as you're torquing it, because those angled approaches could influence the position of that socket over the spark plug. So once we get those all torqued into place, we'll go ahead and insert the spark plug wires just like we did on the other side. And again, we're going to insert the dielectric grease in the boot that goes over the spark plug to make sure in the future they don't adhere to the spark plugs like the ones I tried to pull off this time. And those metal caps go over each of those before you install them. And then once you get those positioned, I'm not actually connecting them straight to the coil pack since those are still sitting there on the valve cover. And I'm reinstalling that bracket, which has 2 nuts that secure it to the side. And then we'll bring that coolant tank back over, gingerly bringing the hoses and everything back into place, and then snapping that little clip on the tank there on the side, and then putting that bolt back in on the front. Well, I hope you found this video informative. It did take about an hour each side. Of course, adding the camera work to it probably increased it a little bit, but allocate a couple hours to do this because it can be a little frustrating, especially if the spark plug wires get attached to the plugs. It takes a little bit of effort to get those off. But if you like the content in the video, make sure you hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you subscribe. It's free, and hit that bell notification to be notified when I upload new videos like this to the channel. Please leave a question or comment down in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.